Okay, good evening, dear friends. How are you all doing? Here we are, we're doing the seventh installment of the Daily Mitzvah, continuing the mitzvahs which are essential to the beliefs and the understanding of a Jew. We have three mitzvahs for today. Let us get going. The first mitzvah for today is the prohibition that a Jew is not allowed to desecrate the name of God, which is the negative form of the mitzvah that we learned about yesterday, that there's a mitzvah to sanctify the name of God. Today we learn, and you shall not desecrate that name of Hashem. The idea of this mitzvah is that every single Jew represents God to this world. We are ambassadors of Judaism. We are ambassador of godliness, of holiness, of morality, and we wear that. We have that, whether we like it or not, and we need to act up to that. And when a Jew does not live up to that standard, and when a Jew does not show that and live up to par, that desecrates the name of Hashem. A Jew is not a private citizen. We are ambassadors, and we reflect negatively on God, and it's a mitzvah for us, and it's a prohibition for us if we desecrate that name that we all carry. This comes from the verse in the Torah, "V'lo yisechalalu Hashem kachi," and you shall not desecrate my holy name. Now, what are the practical applications of this mitzvah? What does it look like? So the Rambam gives us three versions, the three general applications of this mitzvah that we need to be careful of. The first one is like this. There are certain mitzvahs, there are certain prohibitions in the Torah, that if a Jew is in a position that he is forced to do one of these sins, he should be willing to give up his life, he has to die for it, rather than actually commit one of these sins. Which means, generally speaking, the Torah wants a Jew to live, not to die. And for 99% of Yiddishkeit, if there's a life-threatening situation, the Torah wants us to suspend us doing that mitzvah, or suspend us not violating a certain sin, and in order to keep our lives and not to die. But there are three cardinal sins, three sins that under no circumstances is a Jew ever allowed to commit them, even to save his own life. Those three sins are avodah zarah, idolatry, serving an idol; adultery, certain forbidden sexual acts; and number three, murder. So the Rambam says, if an anti-Semite, if somebody comes to a Jew and puts him between a rock and a hard place and tells him, you have to commit one of these sins or I'm going to kill you. You kill or I'll kill you. Bow down to this idol or I kill you. The mitzvah is that a Jew must allow himself to be killed rather than commit one of these very severe sins. If a Jew gives up his life, he is sanctifying the name of Hashem. And if a Jew does not and allows himself on a one-time basis to commit one of these sins, one of these three sins, and to save his life, that is a desecration of the name of Hashem. And then Rambam adds, but then this situation broadens when it's a time of religious persecution. If there's a time where we live in where there is an anti-Semitic regime, and there is religious oppression, and the government is going after all of Judaism, they want to destroy Judaism, they don't want any Jew to do any part of Yiddishkeit. What then happens is this principle that a Jew has to be willing to die all of a sudden applies to the entirety of Judaism. And if an anti-Semite comes, if the government comes and says you must violate this one sin, even if it's the most minor sin, it's a nothing. Is there anything nothing in Judaism? I don't know, but let's say it's the most minute and insignificant detail of Judaism. But the government comes and says, and you must violate this. A Jew must be willing to die even for the smallest detail of Yiddishkeit if it's a time of religious persecution. And this is the first application, which applies to every single Jew, of the principle, of the mitzvah, of not to desecrate the name of Hashem, that whenever there's a situation where the Torah says we must die, we must do so, and uphold our image as a Jew, and not to desecrate the name of Hashem. The second application of one last detail, the Rambam though says that if a Jew does succumb to the pressure, and he actually does violate the sin or the mitzvah, when the Torah tells him that he should not, and he should be willing to die, such a Jew cannot be punished, because at the end of the day, he's not doing it willingly, out of his own volition. He's being forced, he's being coerced, he's being pressured, he's being tortured. And because of that, he's violating a very, very serious sin by desecrating the name of Hashem, but there's no punishment involved. Because there's a rule in Yiddishkeit that in order to punish somebody, it needs to be an act of will. And here, it is obviously not if somebody's coming with a gun to his head. Okay. The second application of this principle is that if there's a Jew that commits a sin, but he doesn't commit the sin out of weakness or out of a lack of knowledge, but he commits a sin or out of personal gain, or out of personal pleasure. Okay, there's a Jew, he does a sin, nothing personal. He's not doing it to go against the God. He's not committing a sin to go against Judaism. Either he's just not used to doing this mitzvah, or he was never educated better, or just this is his weakness. He feels he'll get a lot of personal gain. He has a lot of personal pleasure. So it's hard for him to not do this thing or to do this thing. Okay. But that's not what we're talking about over here. Let's say there's a Jew who does a sin, and he does it for the whole intention to disobey God. He's doing it out of spite. He's doing it out of malice. Total ill intention. He's not doing it because he gets pleasure out of doing this act. He's doing it simply to spit in God's face, so to speak. If such a Jew does that, that is called Achil Hashem, desecrating God's name. That's the second application of this mitzvah. The third application of this mitzvah is if you have a Jew. And this third application doesn't apply to all Jews. It only applies to, you'll see in a second, a small percentage of the Jewish people. If you have a Jew who's known to be a very righteous person, he has a very big name of being a very pious person, of being a great Torah scholar, he's a very special person, a leader of the Jewish people. Such a person has to be very careful the way he acts. And even if there's something there's a certain act, and it's not a sin at all, there's no problem to do this. And if a regular guy would do this, it's not a problem at all. But because he is such a special person, and because he is of such renown, and he's a Torah scholar, and people look up to him, and if he does this, people may think he's doing something wrong. It's not a sin, but it has the smell of a sin, it has the whiff of a sin. It's a little bit fishy. He is not allowed to do that. And if he does something, even if it's totally appropriate, but others may interpret it as being inappropriate, that is desecrating the name of Hashem, because such a person, represents God's name on even a higher standard than most Jews. What is an example of this? So the Rambam brings down from the Talmud that the great sage, the Rav, said, an example of this principle would be, if I, the great Rav, would go into the butcher, take meat, and not pay right away. Now, I know, and the butcher knows, and the butcher knows that I know, that he knows that I know, that I'm going to pay him, and that I'm a very good, loyal customer, and I'm an upstanding man. And if I owe money, I'm going to come back tomorrow and pay him the money. But other people are going to look and say, look at Rav, look at this great rabbi, he thinks he's such a hotshot, he could walk in and take meat for free. So I'm not doing anything wrong, but people may interpret that I'm doing something wrong. And therefore, if Rav would do that, a great sage would do that, that would be desecrating Hashem's name. And another example that the Rambam brings from another great sage, he says that it would be desecrating Hashem's name if I, a great sage, would walk even 4 cubits without studying Torah and without tefillin, without wearing tefillin. So, this is a long mitzvah, a long description here, but this is the essence of the mitzvah, that a Jew has a commandment to not desecrate the name of Hashem, because we represent Hashem, and we have to always remember that. The second mitzvah for today is not to destroy, or not to cause damage to the house of God, which is the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, but on a smaller level, to a house of worship, of a shul, etc., and not to destroy or cause damage or to deface any holy books like a Torah scroll or any of the books of the prophets, and not to erase the written name of God as it's one of the holy names of God as it is written down. This mitzvah comes from the verse. The Torah describes that there's a mitzvah. We're going to learn about it later. There's a mitzvah that a Jew must destroy idols, must destroy houses of idolatry, and the Jew must destroy the altars of idolatry. But then the Torah says, Lo yisasun kain laHashem Elokechem, and you shall not do so to the Lord your God. So we see from over here, there's a mitzvah to not destroy anything that is holy and godly, and used in the worship of Hashem. Okay, the third and final mitzvah for today is the mitzvah that a Jew is commanded to listen to the prophets. We don't have them anymore today, but once upon a time, before the temple was destroyed, there's something called prophecy. There are certain Jews who were gifted with divine inspiration, and they were our prophets. And it's a massive idea, how do you know if a guy is a real prophet and not an imposter? But if somebody's proven to be a real prophet, then you must listen to him. There's a mitzvah in the Torah that you must listen to a prophet. The Rambam then says something which is fascinating. You have to even listen to a prophet, even if he tells you to go against a mitzvah, or even if he tells you to do a sin on a temporary basis. A prophet has the right, and indeed they have exercised this right many times, to, on a temporary basis, suspend any mitzvah, almost any mitzvah, or almost any prohibition in the Torah, as a temporary injunction. If they do it permanently, if a prophet comes and says that I'm going to remove a mitzvah or add a mitzvah on a permanent basis, that's no good. Then he's a false prophet. But as a temporary act, as a temporary injunction, prophets have that right, and Jews must listen to a prophet, even when a prophet tells them to go against the Torah on a temporary level. Now it is very interesting. Even Moses was the first one who exercised this right as a prophet and gave a temporary command to the Jews to violate the mitzvah in the Torah. But I'll just share with you one little example, which is very apropos, an example from Elijah the prophet. It's a pretty well-known story. Elijah the prophet is living at a times when he lived. Most of the Jews were being pulled and lured into the lifestyle of idolatry, and he called the prophets of the idol that was very popular at his times. It was called the Baal. He challenged them to a showdown in Israel on Mount Carmel. I was there on Mount Carmel. And what he did was he challenged each of them to bring a sacrifice to their God, and whichever God it will provide the fire, that is the true God. And it's a beautiful story. The prophets of the Baal could not get this false god, this idol, the Baal, to provide a fire. And Elijah, as soon as he offered the sacrifice, a fire came down from heaven, and all the Jews proclaimed, Hashem hu Elokim, the Lord's our God. And that is how Elijah the prophet got all the Jews to return to God, return to the belief in the one God. And for all of you who are going to be joining the bris tomorrow evening, Elijah the prophet is going to be there, God willing. Elijah the prophet visits all the bris. So we'll mention Elijah the prophet's name. But here's the interesting thing. Elijah the prophet did something which was against the Torah. You are not allowed to, we're going to learn about it sometime over this coming year, you are not allowed to offer a sacrifice outside of the Holy Temple. And Elijah did just that. He goes up to the north of Israel, to Mount Carmel, right outside of Tveria, right outside of Haifa, and he starts bringing a sacrifice to God outside of the Holy Temple. And he was allowed to do that because it was a temporary act. He wasn't permanently changing or suspending or annulling a mitzvah. He was doing it as a temporary thing, and the prophets have that right to do that, and we must listen to the prophets. Dear friends, a little bit long for today, but we got some very important mitzvahs in today. Those are the 3 mitzvahs for today. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you all tomorrow night for our next installment of the Daily Mitzvah. Seid gesund.